On July 17th, 1971, a group of 4 friends, led by David Nolan, created the Committee to form a Libertarian Party. The formation was prompted in part by price controls and the end of the gold standard implemented by President Richard Nixon, and on December 11th of that year, they made up their mind and formed the Libertarian Party, beating out the other name choice, the New Liberty Party. The Libertarian Party viewed the dominant Republican and Democratic parties as having diverged from what they viewed as libertarian principles of the American Founding Fathers. As the election was right around the corner, they chose to nominate a candidate. Their candidates were John Hospers for president and Tawny Nathan to be his running mate. For those who don't know, the Libertarian Party elects their vice presidential candidate separately from the presidential candidate. At this time, the party had grown to over 80 members and had attained ballot access in 2 states and had write-in access in 4 others. In the end of the election, they managed to earn 3,674 votes and 1 faithless elected from Virginia, despite not being on the ballot. Ever since the formation of the party, there has been a divide between anarcho-capitalists, people who advocate for the abolition of the government in favor of pure laissez-faire capitalism, and minarchists who advocate the government should exist but only handle certain things such as the military, fire department, etc. So in 1974, at their convention, they adopted the Dallas Accord, which basically made it a part of the Libertarian platform to not explicitly say whether or not a government should exist at all. This made the Libertarian Party a big tent party that appealed to ANCAPs, minarchists, classical liberals, Rockefeller Republicans, and to an extent left libertarians. Don't get used to hearing that because the party appeals more to right libertarianism than left libertarianism. The 1975 convention was held at the Statler Hilton Hotel in New York City. The Libertarian Party held their conventions 1 year earlier to avoid certain rules and regulations. At the convention, they nominated Roger McBride as their candidate for president, who was the co-creator of Little House on the Prairie and the faithless elector that voted for John Hospers in 1972, and David Berglund was elected to be his running mate. They had ballot access in 32 states, plus DC. The 1976 election established the Libertarian Party as the #1 alternative party in the United States with 0.21% of the popular vote, and it remains one of the most successful alternative parties since the Second World War. In the 1980 presidential contest, the Libertarian Party elected Ed Clark, an American lawyer and politician, for president, and David Koch, one of the infamous Koch brothers, to be his running mate, who paid for the campaign himself. They ran on a more moderate classical liberal faction of the party, led by Cato Institute founder Ed Crane, which was more popular than the minarchist and ANCAP faction led by Murray Rothbard. And that shows, considering the more radical Libertarian Party had managed to get ballot access on all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Guam, the first time a third party accomplished this since the Socialist Party in 1916, and they managed to get a whopping 1.06% of the popular vote. However, in 1983, Koch and Crane left the party, taking a lot of the moderate support with them, so the party in turn nominated David Berglund for president, beating out Gene Burns, a talk radio host from Florida, Earl Ravenel, a foreign policy analyst, academic, and writer, and Mary Ruitt, a research scientist from Texas. James A. Lewis was elected to be his running mate, and since the moderate support was gone, they only had ballot access in 38 states and 0.25% of the popular vote. The Libertarian Party began their primaries in 1987. The 2 main candidates that won the nomination were Russell Means, a Native American activist, and Dr. No himself, Congressman Ron Paul. Paul and Means were described as members of the right and left sides of the Libertarian Party respectively, as Paul was a pro-life libertarian and Means was calling for more resolves on social issues rather than economic ones. By June of that year, Paul was appearing at speaking events with Libertarian vice presidential candidate Andre Maru. Both individuals won the nominations respectively and made more campaign appearances, including a third-party forum with Lenora Fulani of the New Alliance Party. By the end of the election, Paul was on the ballot in 48 states plus DC and received 0.47% of the popular vote and has remained the most popular Libertarian Party politician yet. The Libertarian Party had 2 candidates run for the nomination in 1992, Richard Body, a college instructor, and Andre Maru, Ron Paul's previous running mate. He eventually won the nomination, and Nancy Lord was voted in to be his running mate. He had full ballot access and eventually got 0.28% of the popular vote. Then in 1996, which was coincidentally the first year they held a convention on election year, the party had full ballot access and had many people run for the nomination. Rick Tompkins, a former candidate for senator in Arizona, Irwin Schiff, a writer and prominent figure in the tax protest movement from Nevada, Douglas J. Omen, a political activist from California, Jeffrey Dickett, a political activist from Louisiana, and lastly, Harry Edson Brown, an American writer, politician, and investment advisor. Harry Brown eventually won the nomination, and Joe Jorgensen was elected to be his running mate, and even though they were on the ballot in all 50 states and D.C., they came in 5th place with 0.5% of the popular vote. They lost their 3rd place status thanks to Ross Perot of the Reform Party and Ralph Nader of the Association of State Green Parties. Brown later sought the nomination again in 2000 and beat a couple of contenders including Don Gorman, former chair of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party. Art Oliver, the former mayor of Bellflower, California, was elected to be his running mate. They had ballot access in all 50 states plus D.C. and remained in 5th place with 0.36% of the popular vote. The 2004 election knocked them down a peg, since they only had ballot access in 48 states plus D.C., and as such, they had a lot of people eyeing for the nomination, such as American talk show host Gary Nolan, no relation to David Nolan, film producer and director Aaron Russo, and software engineer and former talk show host Michael Badnarik. Badnarik won the nomination, and Richard Kapenga was voted in to be his running mate. They eventually got 0.32% of the popular vote. In 2008 was a strange year for the Libertarian Party, since their ideal candidate, Dr. Ron Paul, was seeking the Republican nomination rather than the Libertarian one. The Libertarian Party tried to draft Ron Paul, even offering him a chance to be their nominee if he failed to get the Republican nomination. Paul, living up to his nickname, said no. Since Paul didn't want it, 10 people came to the table to become the pro-liberty candidate. I'll only be covering the 4 major candidates: Mike Gravel, former senator from Alaska and previous candidate for the Democratic nomination earlier that year; Wayne Allen Root, sports handicapper and businessman from Nevada; Mary Ruwart, making a return from 1984; and Bob Barr, former congressman and U.S. attorney from Georgia. After 6 ballots, Barr won the nomination and Root was elected to be his running mate. Another problem arose when Ron Paul, after giving an endorsement to the 4 major third-party candidates, Ralph Nader, Bob Barr, Cynthia McKinney, and Chuck Baldwin, it was revealed that Barr and Root had offered Paul the chance to be the vice presidential candidate, only to be turned down, and to make things worse, Paul later retracted his endorsement for Barr and moved it purely to be an endorsement for Chuck Baldwin, due to Barr pressuring him to not be silent about the campaign. Barr had ballot access in 45 states and got 0.4% of the popular vote. In between the 2008 and 2012 elections, we saw the rise of the Tea Party movement, which we'll get in its own video, which had protesters advocate for paleoconservative and right libertarian values, such as lower taxes, which was largely credited to Ron Paul's campaign in 2008. And while the Republican Party benefited the most of these voters, the Libertarian Party also benefited from this, and as such, multiple people ran for the candidacy of the Libertarian Party, such as Roger Lee Wright's 2-time vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, Sam Sloan, an American chess player, publisher, and political figure, and Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico and former Republican candidate in 2012. Johnson described himself as a Rockefeller Republican, classical liberal, and that he had fiscally conservative but socially progressive views, and since he was a relative moderate on the issues, he won the nomination, and Judge Jim Gray was elected to be his vice presidential nominee. Johnson was immensely popular, like the Clark Coke ticket of yesteryear, even getting $333,751 in matching funds. A first for the Libertarian Party, Johnson received popular endorsements from many celebrities in the political and not political fields, such as Penn Jillette, Philip DeFranco, and Jesse Ventura. He participated in multiple third-party debates, all with Jill Stein and some with Virgil Goode and Rocky Anderson, and this exposure worked in Johnson's favor, as it got 0.99% of the popular vote, just for being on the ballot in 48 states plus D.C. The 2016 election was seen as the perfect opportunity for the Libertarian Party or any other third party to take control due to the unpopularity of the major two-party candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So a lot of pressure was on the Libertarian Party candidate to be the voice of not only the Libertarians, but also the never-Trumpers of the right and the Bernie Bros of the left. All 17 of them. However, I'll only be covering the 5 frontrunners and 1 special candidate. Mark Allen Feldman, a physician and activist from D.C., Darrell W. Perry, founder of the New Hampshire Liberty Party and eventual chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, Vermin Supreme, a perennial satirical candidate, John McAfee, founder of McAfee Inc., Austin Peterson, founder of the Libertarian Republic and 2008 senatorial candidate from Missouri, and lastly Gary Johnson, making a comeback from 2012. During the primaries, John Stossel invited Johnson, Peterson, and McAfee to the first nationally televised Libertarian presidential debate, aside from networks such as C-SPAN and RT. It was estimated that around 200,000 people watched the debate. The party held its national convention on May 26th to 30th, 2016 in Orlando, Florida. After 2 ballots, Johnson was declared the nominee, and that led to some controversy as many people saw him as a failed Republican and not a real Libertarian. Johnson saying that he would have signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and having to require a driver's license didn't help him appeal to the more minarchist and anarcho-capitalist voters. Peterson was the first to attempt to make amends by giving Johnson a replica of George Washington's pistol, which was happily accepted. Then came the vice presidential nomination process. Each candidate had an ideal nominee. McAfee had Judd Weiss, Prairie had Will Cooley, who was coincidentally the first Muslim to run for a position such as this. Larry Sharpe was seen as a favorable candidate amongst most of the candidates, but Bill Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, was Johnson's ideal choice, so he quickly became the frontrunner, which led to some issues with some of the presidential candidates. Darrell Perry was quoted in his concession speech by saying,
"We nominate 2 Republican governors as our ticket, and we compromise what we believe to take a federal handout. This party will die! I don't want that!" Elect an actual Libertarian as the vice presidential nominee.
And cited the Reform Party's failure in the election of 2000 to the federal funding they got for nominating Pat Buchanan, an individual who did not actually believe in the platform of the Reform Party. Peterson also voiced concern by saying,
"Our enemies are always those who serve the interests of the state, not individual liberty, which is why I cannot endorse Bill Weld for vice president."
After hearing this, Johnson threw the pistol in the garbage, which angered many delegates. It didn't help that a candidate for the Libertarian National Chair, James Week II, in an effort to drop out, began to strip down to a thong. Yeah, talk show hosts had a blast with that one. Regardless, Johnson and Weld rose in the polls, getting up to 10% in national polls. It was the closest since 1996 or even 1912 where a third party seemed like a viable option. Johnson made a huge impact by being the only other candidate on the ballot in all 50 states plus DC, even making appearances on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Although Johnson faced some issues such as not knowing what Aleppo is and not being able to name a foreign leader that he liked, and this.
I think I could stand up there for the whole debate and not say anything and emerge as a leader.
That possibly had some involvement in his poll numbers dropping. John Oliver's vicious attack on him and Jill Stein might have made some unsure Johnson voters second-guess their choice. It didn't help that Bill Weld kind of quote-unquote endorsed Hillary Clinton. All he really did was voice concerns over a Trump presidency, but the media took it as an endorsement. As Election Day came close, the idea of Johnson winning was drifting farther and farther away, but the idea of getting Johnson or Stein to the 5% threshold to get the $12.5 million in federal election funds to help them in their elections in 2020 was actually more of a issue than them actually winning. However, Johnson was only able to get 3.27% of the popular vote, which many libertarians saw as a victory since it was a 2.28% increase. To add a cherry on top, Ron Paul received one faithless elector thanks to Bill Green from Texas. And even better, after Trump won, multiple Republican office holders party switched over to the Libertarian Party. But recently, the party has been involved in a lot of controversies, one regarding Libertarian Party Vice Chair Arvin Vohra, who advocated for removing the age of consent and said that, quote, "Anyone who felt it was okay for 2 men to have sex and not a 25-year-old man and a 15-year-old girl is a hypocrite." The controversy arose when they tried to force him to resign, and the effort lost to a 2/3 vote. And in response, Larry Sharpe resigned from his position of committee as Region 8 alternate. Another controversy arose when the Mises Caucus, a faction in the Libertarian Party that adheres to the teachings of Ludwig von Mises, offered to invite and pay the speaking fees of Andrew Napolitano, the host of a libertarian/conservative news program, and lifelong libertarian politician Ron Paul. And when asked, many Libertarian Party leaders said no, saying that Ron Paul, quote, "he has no idea what the LP represents," to which many Libertarian YouTubers such as Julie Borowski and Seamus Coughlin of Freedom Tunes responded negatively by saying things like the LP is a joke and Mises and Libertarian Party should go hand in hand and not have its own caucus. Dr. No himself even chimed in by saying, "Can I get my gold coin back?" referencing the fact that he bought a lifelong membership back in 1987 and he used a gold coin rather than a Federal Reserve note to make a point. Libertarian National Chairman Nicholas Sarwark attempted to put out the fire by saying, quote, "If Ron Paul decides he wants to attend the Libertarian Party National Convention in New Orleans and speak, I'll make sure he gets his time on the stage. It's the least we can do after a lifelong member, former presidential nominee, and Hall of Liberty award winner." And with that, we reach the modern day history of the Libertarian Party. So to all you pot-smoking, gun-toting, freedom-loving, laissez-faire capitalists, I hope the party of principle gets a chance to take a position in government at one point. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, share, and comment to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're into more political stuff like this, you can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Quora, go to my website, or listen to my podcast, E Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. And to any libertarian who might see this video and might want to make an appearance to clarify your points, hit me up in my email.